It started as one of those nights where everything feels a little off and you can't quite explain why. It was late October, just a few days before Halloween, and the air had turned cold enough that I'd cranked on the furnace for the first time in months. I remember that detail specifically because of how the ducts rattled for the first few minutes like they were trying to shake off the dust of a long slumber. I live alone in a two-bedroom house outside of Dayton, Ohio, in a quiet neighborhood that was built in the 60s. It's not the kind of place where bad things happen. We don't lock our mailboxes. We wave at each other when we pass by. It's quiet, calm, until that night. I had been watching a movie on my laptop in bed, something dumb to wind down after work. Around 11:30 p.m., I turned it off and checked the doors. The front and back were locked. I clicked the deadbolt twice, just out of habit. I even checked the windows, even though I hadn't opened them in weeks. Everything was secure. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasiness. You know how sometimes your house feels too quiet? Like the silence has a weight to it? By midnight, I had the lights off and was trying to fall asleep, but I kept hearing little creaks and thumps. Houses settle, I told myself. It's old. But I'd been living there 3 years, and this felt different. The noises weren't random. They felt intentional. At about 12:45 a.m., I heard a knock. Not a knock like someone being polite. It was a hard, single thump, like someone had hit the front door with their fist or maybe their shoulder. I froze in bed. Another thump came. Then silence. I didn't move. My bedroom's at the back of the house, so I couldn't see the front door. I strained to listen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't hear footsteps, no voice, just one more knock. Sharp, deliberate. I grabbed my phone and turned off the ringer. Then I slid out of bed slowly, not turning on any lights. I crept toward the front of the house and peeked around the corner toward the front door. There was no one. I stood there for a full minute, watching the door, waiting for another sound. Then I moved to the peephole. No one on the porch. The motion light was off. I waited another 10 minutes before going back to bed. I didn't fall asleep. At around 2:15 a.m., I heard the sound of a window being jiggled. Not loudly, but enough that it was unmistakable. It came from the guest bedroom at the far end of the hall. I moved like a shadow, barefoot on the cold floor, staying low. I didn't have a weapon besides a baseball bat I kept in the closet, but I hadn't thought to grab it yet. I just wanted to confirm what I'd heard. I made it to the guest room, eased the door open, and froze. Someone was trying to lift the window. The lock was catching, but the frame was shifting. I felt an instant cold sweat break out over my body. I backed up, careful not to make a sound, then sprinted to my bedroom, snatched my phone, and dialed 911. My voice was shaking, but I kept it low as I told the dispatcher someone was trying to break into my home. They told me to stay on the line and remain quiet. I crouched in the bedroom closet with the door open just a crack. From where I sat, I could hear the window in the guest room finally slide open. Then came the sound of feet landing on the floor inside. I was still on the line with the dispatcher when the footsteps moved slowly down the hallway. Every board creaked under their weight. Whoever it was wasn't rushing. They were methodical. They passed my bedroom. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Then I heard another set of footsteps. Heavier. 2 people. I was told the police were on the way. I think I whispered something back, but I barely remember. My pulse was so loud I thought they'd hear it. The second set of footsteps had a heavier gait. It was as if the first one was guiding the second through the house. I heard them talking in hushed voices. Not whispers, but low mutterings. Male voices. One sounded younger than the other. They were inside for what felt like an eternity. I heard drawers opening in the kitchen. Cabinets. At one point, I heard one of them say, "Check the basement." There's no basement. I realized then they didn't know the layout of the house. This wasn't some carefully planned heist. They were figuring it out as they went. And then my closet door moved. Not a lot, just an inch. Just an inch. Enough to see a flash of light. A flashlight beam passed over the clothes. I almost screamed, but I bit down on my hand so hard I tasted blood. The light disappeared. The footsteps retreated. They hadn't seen me. I stayed in that closet for another 10 minutes until the dispatcher told me the police were at the front door. I had to crawl out, unlock it, and let them in. When they searched the house, the intruders were gone. They had taken a small stash of cash from my kitchen drawer, some electronics, and oddly, a pair of my running shoes. But they had come inside, walked through my hallway, opened doors, looked into rooms. They were in my home. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. The police said they found pry marks on the window and a footprint on the sill. They canvassed the neighborhood, but no one had seen anything. I installed a security system the next day. Cameras, sensors, motion lights, everything I could think of. But what still bothers me, even now, is the moment I heard the closet door creak. That meant one of them was less than 2 feet from where I was hiding. He shined his flashlight in and didn't open the door. Why? He must have known someone was home. My car was in the driveway. There were lights on in the house before I went to bed. Did he see me? Did he see my eyes in the dark and decide to leave? Or did he want to come back later? 3 weeks passed. I started to feel normal again. Went back to work, got back into a routine. Then, one night, I came home and found the side gate open. I always keep it latched. Nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry. But I found a fresh cigarette butt on the patio table. I don't smoke. I never have. The police couldn't do anything with it. No prints. Nothing to trace. Another week passed. Then I found a photo slipped under my doormat. It was a picture of me, taken through the blinds of my living room window. In the photo, I was on the couch watching TV, completely unaware. I moved out of the house the next day, stayed with friends, ended up selling the place within the month, even though it meant taking a loss. Sometimes I wonder if it was some random junkie break-in, just a couple of guys looking for easy stuff to pawn. But I always come back to the photo. Someone had been watching me long enough to know my routine, knew when I was home, knew when I'd be most vulnerable. The police never found the men. I changed my name when I moved out of state, cut ties, started over. But I still wake up some nights, heart pounding, certain that there's someone standing in the hallway, just watching, waiting. Story the end. The evening was quiet and uneventful when Lisa arrived home from work. It was a Thursday night, just past 7 p.m., and the neighborhood was wrapped in the soft glow of streetlights. Her small suburban home sat neatly between two others, each window darkened, save for the warm flicker of television screens inside. Lisa lived alone, a fact she embraced with both pride and a bit of wariness. The safety she felt in her neighborhood had lulled her into a comfortable routine, but that night would unravel everything she thought she knew. Lisa unlocked her front door and stepped inside, dropping her keys in the bowl by the entrance. The familiar scent of lavender from the candles she lit in the evenings greeted her, a small comfort after the stress of her job as a nurse. Her cat, Whiskers, sauntered out from under the couch, rubbing against her ankles as if to welcome her back. She smiled and scratched behind his ears before heading to the kitchen to set down her purse. As she prepared a cup of tea, Lisa glanced out the window facing the front yard. The street was empty except for the occasional passing car. Her mind drifted to the late-night shift she was scheduled to work tomorrow, and she considered calling her sister to chat for a while. Just as she lifted her phone from the counter, the power went out. The kitchen lights flickered off, plunging her into near darkness. Lisa froze for a moment, the cup still in her hand. She fumbled for her phone's flashlight and clicked it on. Probably just a blown fuse, she murmured to herself, moving cautiously through the house to check the circuit breaker in the basement. But the basement stairs creaked beneath her feet, each sound amplified in the quiet house, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. The power outage felt odd, too sudden, too complete. Outside, no streetlights, no neighbors' porch lights, only the occasional flash of headlights in the distance. Her heart quickened. As Lisa reached the basement door, a sudden noise made her freeze. It was a faint scraping sound, coming from the living room. She strained to listen, every nerve alert. The house was supposed to be empty. She had double-checked the locks before leaving for work that morning. Now something was inside. She grabbed the kitchen knife from the counter and crept toward the living room, the beam of her phone's flashlight trembling in her hand. The scraping sound grew louder, metal dragging against wood. Lisa's breath hitched. She moved toward the hallway where the master bedroom door was slightly ajar. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she carefully peeked inside. The room was dark, but she caught sight of movement near the closet. A tall figure, dressed in black from head to toe, was rifling through her clothes. The intruder had a mask covering their face and gloves on their hands. Lisa swallowed her fear and retreated silently to the kitchen, her mind racing. She needed to call for help, but with the power out, the landline was dead and her cell phone battery was dangerously low. Suddenly, the sound of the back door slamming echoed through the house. She spun around, heart hammering, to see the figure turning toward the kitchen. Lisa bolted for the basement door, hoping to find refuge in the dark below. As she descended the creaky stairs, the flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in complete darkness. She fumbled for the light switch, but found only cold, rough concrete walls. Panic surged as she heard footsteps coming down after her. She tripped over a box and fell hard onto the floor, the knife slipping from her grasp. A heavy booted foot landed near her head, and she scrambled back, grabbing a rusty pipe from the corner. The intruder appeared at the bottom of the stairs, face obscured but eyes gleaming in the faint moonlight filtering through a small basement window. "Stay quiet." The voice was low, threatening. Lisa shook her head, backing away slowly. "Please, I have nothing valuable," she whispered. The man laughed harshly. "That's not why I'm here." Suddenly, a loud banging on the front door startled them both. The intruder cursed and grabbed Lisa roughly, dragging her toward the basement stairs. "Move," he hissed. Lisa struggled fiercely, her adrenaline kicking in. With a sudden burst of strength, she shoved him back and sprinted toward the door leading outside. The basement door slammed behind her as she fought the cold night air, scrambling up the steps and out the back door into the dark yard. She ran toward the neighbor's house across the street, pounding on the door until a startled man opened it. "Call 911," she gasped. Police arrived minutes later, surrounding the house and arresting the intruder, who was found hiding in the attic, a cache of stolen items beside him. Lisa never forgot that night, the terror of being trapped inside her own home, the feeling of helplessness and fear, and the chilling realization that safety could be an illusion. Even now, months later, when the power flickers or the house creaks at night, she flinches, the memory still raw, the horror still alive. Story the end. It started on a Friday night in October when the air was just cold enough to make the windows fog from the inside. My wife, Kelly, had gone to visit her sister in Portland for the weekend, taking our daughter, Abby, with her. I was looking forward to a quiet weekend alone in our home in Boise, a modest two-story built in the late 90s. It wasn't much, but we made it ours. Blue shutters, a wide porch, bench, and a small backyard that backed up to a wooded trail. I made dinner, watched some mindless TV, and eventually poured myself a bourbon. The house was quiet, unnervingly so, without Abby's toys making random beeping noises or Kelly humming in the kitchen. I stayed up later than I meant to, eventually falling asleep on the couch with the TV still playing low-volume reruns of some crime show. I woke up around 2:40 a.m. with the room completely dark. The TV had gone to standby, and for a moment I thought the power had gone out. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate thud from upstairs, just once. I sat up slowly, heart already picking up pace. I wasn't fully awake yet, but I knew that sound didn't belong. Kelly and Abby were gone. The house was locked, or at least it should have been. I reached for my phone, still on the coffee table, and turned the flashlight on. My Glock was in the safe upstairs in the bedroom. Stupid. I stood up, listened. Another sound. A creak. Faint, like someone trying to move carefully across the wooden hallway floor on the second floor. It wasn't the house settling. I'd lived here for over a decade. I knew every pop and creak this place made, and this wasn't that. I slowly made my way toward the base of the stairs and turned off my flashlight, not wanting to give away my position. My eyes adjusted to the faint streetlight glow bleeding in through the living room windows. I waited. Held my breath. Another step upstairs. My mouth went dry. I considered calling 911, but decided I needed to confirm first. What if it was just the wind or a squirrel in the attic? I tried convincing myself, but I already knew that wasn't it. I crept upstairs as quietly as I could, skipping the creaky third step. At the top landing, I looked down the hallway. Our bedroom door was slightly open, so was Abby's. The guest room at the end was dark and silent. I stood frozen, listening. No more sounds. Then, from the bedroom, I heard a very soft scrape, like a drawer opening. My drawer. That was enough. I turned and went back down as quickly as I could without making noise. I dialed 911 once I hit the bottom. My voice was low and urgent as I explained the situation. They told me to stay on the line and wait outside, but I wasn't going to leave without knowing what was in my house. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Big, metal. Not a gun, but better than nothing. I stood at the base of the stairs again and then froze when I heard something different. Footsteps, moving fast, coming down the stairs. I stepped back, barely in time to avoid a tall man barreling down toward me. He was wearing all black, a ski mask, and gloves. He saw me and lunged. I swung the flashlight and caught him in the arm. He grunted and tried to shove past me toward the front door. But another figure was behind him, shorter, also masked. I hadn't realized there were two. The second one grabbed me from the side. I twisted, got my elbow into his ribs, and he fell back. But the first guy had managed to get the door open. He turned back, shouted, "Let's go!" The second man ran, knocking over a lamp. They both fled into the night. I stood there shaking, flashlight in hand, staring into the darkness outside until the red and blue lights flooded my street 5 minutes later. The cops searched the house thoroughly. Nothing was taken, at least not noticeably. They had gone through drawers, opened closets. The officer told me it was likely they thought the house was empty, maybe had scoped it out and assumed I was gone with my family. He said they'd probably panicked when they heard me wake up or when they saw the TV light turn off. But I knew better. Something was off. The way they moved in the house, how comfortable they seemed. They weren't just random burglars. This was planned. And they had been looking for something. I stayed at a hotel the rest of the weekend. Kelly was hysterical when I told her what happened, and we had security cameras installed as soon as I got home. Deadbolts, motion sensors, everything. For a while, it felt like we were living in a fortress. But it wasn't over. A few weeks later, I found a note in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just folded notebook paper. It said, in shaky handwriting, "You weren't supposed to be there." I reported it. Cops said they'd keep an eye out, but there wasn't much they could do. The camera footage didn't catch anyone that night. Whoever left the note had avoided every angle. Time passed. We tried to move on. I started sleeping upstairs again, gun on the nightstand this time. Abby had nightmares, even though she didn't know the full story. Kelly jumped at every sound. Then, one night in December, it happened again. This time, the alarm system woke us. A door sensor beeped at 3:16 a.m. The back door. I grabbed my gun, told Kelly to stay in the bedroom with Abby, and I crept downstairs. There were wet footprints in the kitchen, just standing there, not moving, like someone had stood still and watched, but no one was there. I checked every room, every closet. Nothing. I reviewed the camera feed. The back door opened on its own. No one seen, just the door slowly swinging inward like pushed by the wind. Only it wasn't windy that night. The cops came again. They said maybe the lock failed or I forgot to latch it properly. But I didn't. We moved 2 months later. Sold the house, took a loss. I didn't care. But 3 weeks after we moved, a package came to our new address. No return label. Inside was a photo, a picture of our old bedroom, taken from inside the closet. You could see me, asleep on the bed. The date on the back was from the first night, the night I thought they fled. But the photo had been taken after that. After I went back to sleep, someone had stayed behind. That night, someone had stayed hidden in the closet while I thought it was over. The idea gutted me. The thought of a stranger silently watching me sleep while I waited for the police to arrive, maybe even slipping out later unnoticed. After that, I changed. Not just my habits, but something deeper. I don't sleep well anymore. I check locks 3 times a night. I can't relax, even in broad daylight. Kelly and I don't talk about that photo. We burned it, but it never left my mind. Some nights I swear I still hear footsteps, and sometimes I wonder if they're watching again from a distance, just waiting. Because if they had our new address, what else did they keep? Story the end. When I first bought the house in Cedar Grove, I thought I was lucky. It was a 2-story colonial built in the 1970s with a red brick facade and a wide front porch. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with maples and oaks and the kind of place where people waved as they passed. The price was lower than I expected, and though I asked the realtor if there was any catch, she just smiled and said the owner had to relocate quickly for work. I didn't think to question it further. I moved in during late September, just before the leaves began to change. I lived alone, recently divorced, and the house felt like a fresh start. I painted the walls myself, replaced the old kitchen tiles, even planted some mums in the flower bed. The nights were silent and peaceful. For a while, it was perfect. The first strange thing I noticed happened about 3 weeks after I moved in. I came home late from work, around 9:30 p.m., and found the side gate open. It swung gently in the breeze, the old hinges creaking. I distinctly remembered closing it that morning. I even latched it. I stood there for a while, staring at it, trying to convince myself it was the wind, or maybe a raccoon. I locked it and went inside. That night, I was woken up by the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old pipes and wooden beams tend to creak, especially as temperatures drop. But these weren't creaks. They were deliberate, measured, almost cautious. I lay still in bed, holding my breath, my ears straining. The footsteps were downstairs, slow one after another, across the hardwood floor. Then silence. I got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the dresser, and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. The downstairs lights were off. I didn't turn them on. I didn't want to let anyone know I was up. I waited. Nothing. Finally, I crept down the stairs, step by step, bat clenched in both hands. I checked the front door. Still locked. Same with the back. The windows were shut and latched, no signs of forced entry. I even checked the basement, flashlight in hand. Empty. It was probably just my imagination, I told myself, or maybe a dream that felt too real. The next morning, I noticed something else. My phone, left charging on the kitchen counter, was unplugged and placed on the other side of the island. I wouldn't have done that. I'm meticulous with small things like that. It made my stomach twist. I brushed it off. The following weekend, I had a friend over, my coworker Ashley. We had wine, watched a movie, laughed about work drama. Around 11:30 p.m., she left. I stayed up to clean the dishes and turn off lights. That's when I saw it. A face. At the window near the back patio. Just for a second. Pale, almost ghostly in the darkness, pressed against the glass. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open. I gasped and dropped the glass I was holding. It shattered on the floor. By the time I turned back toward the window, it was gone. I ran to the door and bolted it, closed every curtain in the house. Then I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers walked the property. They found footprints in the backyard, bare feet, surprisingly, no shoes. They led to the woods that bordered the property but disappeared in the underbrush. "He didn't try to break in?" one officer asked me. "No," I said. "But he was watching, just staring through the window." "Any enemies? Someone from work?" I shook my head. "No one. They told me to keep the doors locked, maybe get some cameras installed. Said it was probably some transient or a bored teenager playing a prank. Still, one of them agreed to patrol the area a bit more for the next few nights." I hardly slept that night. I bought a security system the next morning. Motion sensors, door alarms, 4 exterior cameras. I paid extra to have them installed immediately. I needed the peace of mind. For a week, everything was quiet. The cameras picked up deer, the occasional car, even a raccoon knocking over the trash bin. No sign of the man. Then, just as I was starting to relax, the alarm tripped. It was 2:17 a.m. I woke up to the shrill sound of the motion detector blaring through the house. The notification on my phone read, "Shh, shh, backdoor sensor triggered." I shot out of bed and grabbed the bat again, heart hammering in my chest. I opened the camera feed on my phone. Nothing, just the quiet image of my backyard swaying gently in the breeze. The police came again, no sign of forced entry. The door was still shut and locked. They chalked it up to a malfunction, maybe wind or a branch. But the technician I called the next morning confirmed everything was working perfectly. The sensor had detected something moving through the door. Not outside of it. Through it. That night, I pushed a chair under the doorknob and slept in my clothes. I started keeping the bat in bed with me. 3 nights later, it escalated. I woke up not to a sound, but to a feeling. A presence. The room felt wrong. Too cold. Too still. I sat up and realized the chair that had been under my doorknob was tipped over. The door stood wide open. I know for a fact I'd shut it before bed. I always did. My bat was gone from the side of the bed. I checked the cameras in a panic. All 4 feeds were black. Not frozen, just off. I sprinted to the router in the basement. Still plugged in, still working. But the system had been disconnected manually. Someone had been inside. The police didn't know what to make of it. They checked the logs. No alerts, no footage. Whoever it was had known exactly how to disable the system without triggering a single alarm. I asked them if they thought I was crazy. They looked at each other and gave me the kind of smile people give when they're trying to be polite but don't believe you. I slept with a kitchen knife under my pillow from then on. The bat was never found. I began hearing things at night. Whispers. A faint humming that never lasted long enough to locate. Doors I knew I'd locked were found slightly ajar. Lights flickered. One night I came downstairs to find every cabinet in the kitchen open. Still, there were no fingerprints. No signs of a break-in. I decided to stay with my sister Jenna for a while. I packed a suitcase and planned to leave the next morning. That night I locked every door and window. I even pushed furniture against the front and back doors. Then I went to bed. I woke up at 3:34 a.m. lying on the floor. In the kitchen. My hands were bound with zip ties. My mouth taped shut. Someone had moved me in my sleep. I struggled and kicked, trying to scream through the tape. Then I heard something behind me. Slow footsteps on the tile. He came into view a moment later. The same pale face, the same expressionless eyes, no mask this time. He crouched beside me and tilted his head like a curious animal. His skin was gaunt, eyes too wide. His clothes were old, ripped, stained, dusty. He didn't say anything, just stared. Then he held up my phone, unlocked. He showed me a picture he'd taken, me, sleeping in bed, dozens of them. He had been watching for weeks. Then he walked out of the kitchen. I heard the back door unlock, somehow, and close behind him. I managed to crawl to the hallway and kick the alarm until it triggered. The police came, and this time they took it seriously. My bindings were still on. The phone had dozens of photos, time-stamped, geotagged, all taken inside the house. They launched a full investigation. They found signs of entry beneath the basement. The floorboards behind the water heater had been pulled away, revealing a small tunnel that led into the crawl space. He had been living under the house. For how long, they couldn't say. They found a mattress down there. Trash, clothes, food wrappers. A journal filled with messy, illegible scribbles. Drawings of me. My face over and over, sometimes with X's over the eyes, sometimes smiling. But he was gone. No trace of him, no fingerprints, no DNA. I sold the house a month later, moved across the country, changed my name, got a dog, to this sleep with a camera on and lights by the bed. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I remember his face, just watching me, silently. Story, the end. It started on a Sunday night in mid-January, the kind of bitterly cold evening where the air bites at your cheeks and the wind feels like it's slicing through your jacket. I remember it because it was the last night I ever felt safe in my own home. I had just moved to a quiet neighborhood outside Louisville, Kentucky. It was a modest, older brick house tucked between others just like it. Nothing fancy, just clean, quiet, and affordable. I lived alone. The neighbors seemed polite but distant, which I didn't mind. I'd grown up in apartments, so a bit of isolation felt like a luxury. I had just finished dinner and was rinsing dishes when I heard it, a knock at the front door. Not a hard one, just a few light raps. It was after 8 p.m. and I wasn't expecting anyone. I paused, dried my hands, and peeked through the peephole. No one. I opened the door a crack and glanced around. Porch was empty. The street was quiet, snow crunching slightly in the wind. I chalked it up to kids playing a prank or maybe the wind rattling something loose. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to cleaning. About 10 minutes later, I thought I heard it again, but softer this time, almost like a tap. I froze and stared toward the hallway that led to the front door. I waited. Nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I checked the door again anyway, locked as it should be. The rest of the night was uneventful. I stayed up watching a movie and went to bed around midnight. I remember turning off the hallway light and standing for a second longer than usual, listening. The silence felt heavier than it should have, like something was waiting. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of my bedroom door creaking. Now, I always shut it before bed. It sticks a little, so it makes a distinct scraping sound when it opens. That's what pulled me out of sleep. I sat up, my heart immediately racing. It was pitch black in the room, but I could make out the faintest outline of the door. It was open. Just slightly, but open. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. For what felt like 5 straight minutes, I sat there frozen, trying to decide if I was dreaming, if maybe I hadn't closed it all the way. But then I heard it, the sound of a slow, deliberate step on the hardwood floor. One, then another. It was coming from the hallway. I quietly reached under my bed for the baseball bat I kept there. My hand shook as I gripped it. I got out of bed as silently as I could and inched toward the door. I didn't hear anything else, but that somehow made it worse. I pushed the door open quickly and swung the bat around the corner. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Bathroom door open. Guest room door open. No sign of anyone. Every light was off. I turned on the hallway light and slowly walked through the house. Living room, empty. Kitchen, empty. I checked every closet, every possible place someone could hide. Nothing. But the front door was unlocked. I know I locked it. I know that with absolute certainty. It made my stomach churn. I locked it again and sat in the living room for the next 2 hours, bat in hand, every light on. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next day I bought cameras, indoor and outdoor, motion sensors, a new deadbolt for the front door. I even got a dog from a local shelter, a big German shepherd named Duke. He wasn't trained, but he barked loud enough to shake windows, and that was good enough for me. For a few weeks, everything was quiet. Duke settled in, and I started to sleep through the night again. I told myself it must have been a one-off. Maybe I forgot to lock the door. Maybe the floor creaked because of the house settling. I wanted to believe it. Then, one night in early February, the camera alert on my phone woke me up at 2:47 a.m. Motion detected. Backyard. I opened the app, heart racing. The image was grainy in the low light, but there was definitely someone at the edge of the yard, just standing there near the tree line. I zoomed in. Whoever it was wore dark clothes and was facing the house. I stayed still, watching. After a few seconds, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no one around. No footprints. Nothing. The next day, I bought floodlights and put up signs warning about surveillance. I showed the footage to my neighbor across the street, who told me he hadn't seen anything unusual but said he'd keep an eye out. Another week passed. Then, late one Thursday night, Duke started barking. Loud, vicious, unlike any time before. I was in bed, and it jolted me upright. I ran to the living room where he was scratching at the front window, growling. Outside, someone was walking up my driveway. I flipped on the porch lights and grabbed the bat. But by the time I looked outside again, they were gone. I checked the cameras. The footage showed someone wearing a hoodie walking up to the window and just standing there, staring in, not moving, not trying to break in, just standing there for 5 minutes. Then they turned and walked away, disappearing into the street. I called the police again. Again, they took a report, and again, there was nothing they could really do. As long as they're not breaking in, there's no crime, one officer said almost apologetically. I started sleeping with the bat next to my pillow. I put bells on the doors. I barely left the house after dark. Then came the night everything changed. It was March 1st, a Friday. I had gone to sleep a little after 11. Duke was already curled up on the rug beside the bed. The house was silent. At 2:18 a.m., I woke up to the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. I sat up instantly. Duke growled and sprinted out of the bedroom. I grabbed the bat and followed. In the living room, the window facing the backyard had been smashed in. A brick lay on the floor, surrounded by glass. Cold air poured into the house. Duke barked wildly, running toward the kitchen, and then I heard a thud, like something heavy hitting the floor. Then a scream. Not mine. A deep, angry, guttural scream, like someone had been bitten. I ran into the kitchen and saw Duke lunging at a man dressed in black, face hidden by a ski mask. He was trying to shake the dog off, but Duke had his arm clamped in his jaws. I didn't hesitate. I swung the bat with every bit of strength I had and hit the man in the ribs. He stumbled, fell back, and Duke didn't let go. The guy pulled something from his belt. It looked like a knife. But I hit him again, this time in the arm. He screamed again and finally pushed Duke off, then sprinted toward the back door, smashing through it as he fled. I locked it behind him, heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. I called the police, and this time they didn't take long. They found a trail of blood in the backyard that led out to the woods behind the house. A canine unit tracked it for almost a mile, but lost the scent near a road. The guy had probably parked nearby. They took a statement, collected the knife that had fallen on the floor, and took pictures of the broken window and bloodstains. One officer stayed outside the house until morning, just in case. They never found him. Whoever he was careful. No fingerprints, no clear face on the cameras, and he never came back, not as far as I know. But the damage was done. I sold the house within 2 months, moved back to the city, found a place in a building with a doorman, locked lobby, cameras everywhere. I still have Duke. He sleeps at the foot of my bed every night. Sometimes I still wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and listen for footsteps, for glass breaking, for that creak of a door opening in the dark. It's never there, but I still listen, every night. Story, the end. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. My husband Mark was out of town on a business trip, and our kids, Maya, who was 10, and Oliver, who had just turned 7, were staying with their grandparents about 2 hours away. I remember feeling this strange calmness Friday afternoon after dropping them off. It was the first time I'd had the house to myself in months, and I planned to enjoy every second of it. We lived in a 2-story home in a newer development on the edge of town. It was a place where neighbors waved politely and kept their lawns trimmed. People walked their dogs at night. Porch lights glowed warmly on every street. We felt safe there. Too safe, I think now. That night, I cooked dinner for one, poured a glass of wine, and curled up on the couch to binge watch a show I'd been putting off. Around 10:30, I turned everything off and went upstairs. Before bed, I walked around locking the front and back doors, checking the windows. I wasn't paranoid, just cautious. Habit. Everything was locked up tight. I climbed into bed, scrolled through my phone for a bit, and drifted off. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No nightmare, no noise. Just this strange sense of alertness, like my brain had tripped a silent alarm. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, heart beating a little faster than usual. Then I heard it, a soft thud from downstairs. It wasn't loud. Could have been the fridge kicking on or maybe something shifting on the counter, but it didn't feel right. I sat up and listened. Nothing at first. Then another thud, a little louder, a little closer. I got out of bed quietly and padded over to the top of the stairs. The house was dark, but the moonlight was strong enough to make out the shape of furniture below. I strained to hear. There, faint movement, like the creak of a floorboard. I backed away, heart pounding now. I went back to my room, closed the door silently, and locked it. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher answered immediately. I told her I thought someone was in my house. She asked for my address, confirmed it, and told me to stay where I was. Officers were being dispatched. I moved to my closet and climbed in, pulling the door mostly shut. I sat there in the dark, on the floor, clutching my phone to my chest as the dispatcher kept talking in a calm, steady voice. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy ones, coming up the stairs. My breath caught in my throat. Each step seemed louder than the last until they stopped just outside my bedroom door. There was silence for a moment. Then the handle turned. It jiggled once, twice, then stopped. I waited, paralyzed, as whoever it was stood there on the other side. Then came a knock. 3 soft knocks. Not frantic. Not hard, just deliberate. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. Another knock. The dispatcher was still on the phone, whispering to stay quiet, to stay hidden. Then I heard the sound of something being dragged along the door, maybe the back of a knife or a piece of metal. It scratched slowly from top to bottom, and then silence again. The footsteps retreated. I stayed in the closet, not moving for what felt like forever. The dispatcher said the police were pulling up now. And then I heard shouting downstairs, 2 officers yelling commands. Heavy footsteps, louder now, hurried. A door slammed. More shouting. It was over in seconds. I finally came out when an officer called up that it was safe. I ran downstairs, shaking, trying to breathe. One of them stayed with me while the other checked the perimeter. They hadn't caught anyone. The back door had been forced open. Whoever it was had slipped out the side and vanished before they got there. The police searched the house. No sign of him. But they did find muddy footprints coming up the stairs, leading straight to my bedroom door. They said it looked like he had been inside for a while before I even woke up. They dusted for prints, took photos, asked questions. I answered everything as best I could, but I didn't know anything. I hadn't seen him. I couldn't describe him. All I had were the sounds and the sense that I wasn't alone. That alone was terrifying. The next morning, I packed a bag and drove straight to my in-laws' place. I didn't go back for 2 weeks. Mark came home early from his trip. He installed new locks, cameras, motion lights, but none of that undid the damage. I couldn't sleep, couldn't close my eyes in the dark. Every time I did, I heard the knocks on my bedroom door. We eventually found out that there had been a series of break-ins in the area, mostly at night. One house had security footage of a tall man in a hoodie wearing gloves creeping around their backyard. The face was obscured. The footage was grainy. Nothing came of it. Then, about a month later, something else happened. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was home alone again, just for an hour while Mark ran errands with the kids. I was folding laundry when I noticed something out the window. A white van parked across the street. It wasn't familiar. No markings. No logos. The windows in the back were covered. I watched it for a minute. No one got out. It just sat there. Then I saw the driver's side window roll down slightly. I couldn't see the face clearly, but someone was inside, watching. I stepped away from the window and called the non-emergency police line. I gave them the license plate. They said they'd send a unit to check it out. 10 minutes later, the van drove off before the police arrived. Later, we found out the plate was stolen. The van had been reported in 2 other neighborhoods near ours. No one ever caught the driver, but I know it was him. I started going to therapy after that. The anxiety, the panic attacks, the insomnia, it all got worse. I never used to double-check locks in broad daylight. Now I do. I never used to carry a knife in my purse. Now I keep one in the car too. We even got a dog, big, loud, and alert. I've never felt fully safe again. It's the feeling of violation that stays with you. Someone walked through my kitchen. Someone stood at the foot of my stairs. Someone touched my bedroom door. They were going to do something awful. And if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't called the police right away, I try not to think about that, but I do. Every night, just before I go to sleep, I hear those 3 knocks. I haven't told my kids that part. I don't want them to be scared in their own home. But some nights, when I'm lying in bed listening to every creak and groan of the house, I wonder if someday they'll hear it too. Story, the end. It was the summer of 2014, and I had just moved into a rental house in the outskirts of Fort Collins, Colorado. I was 27 at the time and finally felt like I had enough saved up to live alone after years of bouncing between roommates and couch surfing after college. The house was modest. 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, a small fenced-in yard. But it was mine, and I loved the feeling of walking in after work and knowing I didn't have to share the space with anyone. It was a quiet neighborhood. The houses were spaced far enough apart that I didn't feel boxed in, and at night you could hear crickets and nothing else. Most of the neighbors were older, retirees or couples with grown kids, so there weren't parties or loud music or late-night disruptions. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. Peaceful, even. I spent my evenings reading, cooking, walking my dog around the block. The kind of life I'd always wanted. The first strange thing happened about a month after I moved in. I came home from work and found the back gate unlatched. It wasn't wide open, just slightly ajar. I always latched it, part of my routine when I let my dog out in the morning, so it stood out. Still, I told myself maybe the wind had pushed it open, or maybe I'd forgotten. It was easy to dismiss. I latched it again and forgot about it. Then, a few nights later, I woke up to a noise. It was subtle, a creaking sound like wood shifting under weight. I assumed it was the house settling. Old houses make weird noises when the temperature changes. But my dog, Charlie, a border collie mix who slept at the foot of my bed, stood up and growled. That got my attention. Charlie wasn't a barker. He didn't react to squirrels or neighborhood cats. When he growled, it meant something was wrong. I sat up and listened, heart pounding. Nothing, just silence. I got out of bed and checked the front door. Still locked. The windows were closed. Everything seemed fine. I let Charlie out to pee, watched him sniff around the yard, then brought him back in and went to bed. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the back porch. They weren't mine. I hadn't been in the yard. It hadn't rained in over a week, but the sprinklers ran at night, and the soil in the flower beds was soft. The footprints led up to the back door. I called the police. They came, took a statement, looked around, and told me there wasn't much they could do. No forced entry, no stolen property, no clear suspect. They suggested installing security cameras. I nodded and said I'd think about it. I did more than think about it. That night, I drove to Best Buy and bought a set of wireless cameras. I set them up around the house, one facing the front door, another pointed at the back gate, and one inside aimed at the living room. I reviewed the footage each morning for the next week. Nothing happened. I started to relax. One night, I stayed up late watching a movie and fell asleep on the couch. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not to a noise, but to the sense that something was off. The living room was dark except for the TV flickering. Charlie was whining quietly at the front door. Then I noticed the doorknob. It was moving, slowly, turning back and forth. I froze. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a dream. Someone was trying to open the front door. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I didn't turn on any lights. I just crouched behind the couch and whispered into the phone, telling the dispatcher what was happening. The doorknob stopped turning. Silence. Then a loud thud against the door, like a shoulder being slammed into it. Charlie barked and lunged. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. I stayed where I was, shaking, trying to keep Charlie from going ballistic. Another thud. The door held, but I saw the deadbolt rattle. Then, footsteps. Running footsteps. By the time the police arrived, whoever it was had gone. The officers checked the perimeter. One of them found something in the flower bed beneath the front window. A crumpled fast food bag, and next to it, a red plastic lighter. They bagged it as evidence, but said it probably wouldn't lead anywhere. No prints. No cameras had picked up anything. They were all facing the wrong direction, or too far away. That week, I added 2 more cameras. I replaced the front door with a reinforced one, added a longer deadbolt, and bought motion-activated lights for the porch. And for a while, it worked. No more incidents. I started sleeping through the night again. I kept the doors locked, the cameras running, the alarms set. Then in late September, everything changed. I came home from work one evening and noticed the back door was unlocked. Not just the handle, the deadbolt was undone too. I hadn't used that door all day. I rushed inside. Nothing looked out of place. My TV was still there. Laptop on the kitchen table, jewelry in the drawer. Nothing stolen, but someone had been inside. I knew it. I reviewed the camera footage from the day, and there it was. At 11:17 a.m., a man in a hoodie and jeans walked casually through the backyard, picked the lock in under 20 seconds, and slipped inside. He stayed for over an hour. I watched the footage in horrified silence as he moved through my home, opened the fridge, sat on the couch, went into my bedroom, and shut the door behind him. I never saw what he did in there because the indoor camera only covered the living room. He left the same way he came in. The police took the footage seriously this time. They collected prints, opened an investigation, promised to send patrols through the area, but I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend for the weekend. When I came back that Monday, it was only to grab more clothes and check the house. Everything seemed untouched. Until I walked into the bedroom. Sitting on the pillow was a note, handwritten in small, careful lettering. It said, "Why did you leave?" I moved out the next day, terminated my lease, paid the penalty. I didn't care. I stayed with friends while I looked for a new place. I never went back. The man was never caught. The case went cold. The house got re-rented, and I heard later that a young couple moved in. I hope they never saw what I saw. I hope he lost interest. But there are nights now, even years later, where I wake up and think I hear someone turning the doorknob. Sometimes I check the footage on my new cameras, just to be sure. Sometimes I find nothing. And sometimes I see a shadow standing at the edge of the yard, just watching. Story the end. It was the kind of quiet night that always made Lydia uneasy. Not the kind of uneasiness that made you jump at every creak, but the low-level hum of something you couldn't quite name. The wind wasn't howling. The trees weren't rustling. There was just stillness. Her husband, Darren, had taken their son, Max, to a weekend camping trip 2 hours north. Lydia, who had work early Monday, opted to stay home. They'd lived in their suburban home for 5 years, nestled in a cul-de-sac in a sleepy Michigan neighborhood where people still left their doors unlocked during the day. Lydia had done her nightly routine, washed up, checked that all doors were locked, including the sliding back door, and set the small alarm system they had installed a year ago after someone broke into a neighbor's garage. It wasn't a top-tier system, but it chirped when doors opened and closed and had a panic button. At 11:42 p.m., she was in bed, scrolling her phone, trying to tire out her eyes. She didn't remember falling asleep, but when she woke up, her phone had slipped to the floor, the screen dimmed. The house was dark except for the hallway nightlight. She sat up. Something felt wrong. She couldn't say what. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like an absence of one, a shift. She got out of bed and walked slowly to the top of the stairs. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, and she could see down into the living room. Everything looked normal. The couch, the dining table, even the flickering light of the aquarium in the corner. But she still couldn't shake the feeling. Then came a soft sound, almost imperceptible. A click. She froze. It wasn't loud and it wasn't repeated, just a single deliberate click, like a latch being released. She stood for a full minute at the top of the stairs, not breathing, not moving. Then another sound, this time unmistakable, a soft creak of the wooden floor in the entryway. Her mouth went dry. She quietly backed into the bedroom and closed the door. She listened for more sounds, footsteps, breathing, anything. But the house went silent again. She reached into the drawer and grabbed her phone, heart pounding, only to realize it had died sometime in the night. She looked toward the bedroom phone charger, but it wasn't plugged in. It was still in her bag downstairs. She had brought it into the kitchen earlier when she cooked dinner and had never returned it. She stared at the dark screen, then slowly approached the window. Pulling the curtain aside just an inch, she peeked outside. No movement. No strange cars, just the soft yellow glow of the neighbor's porch light. She tried to talk herself down. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe she didn't lock the back door as tightly as she thought. But then she heard it again. Another step, this time closer. Deliberate. She clamped a hand over her mouth. Someone was downstairs, moving slowly. She crept to the closet, pulled open the sliding door as quietly as she could, and slipped inside. It was cramped with winter coats, boxes, and an old vacuum, but she crouched behind a row of hanging clothes and stayed still. She stayed that way for what felt like 20 minutes, straining to hear over the thumping of her own heart. Footsteps came up the stairs, slowly, one at a time. There was no hesitation in the footsteps. They weren't testing the house. Whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. She heard the soft groan of the hallway floor, then a pause outside the bedroom door. She hadn't locked it. A second passed. Then the handle turned. The door creaked open. Light from the hallway barely lit the bedroom, but she could see a shadow, long, thin, unmistakably human, cast across the carpet. The figure stood there, just stood. She could hear faint breathing now. Not heavy, not rushed, calm, almost curious. She tried not to make a sound, barely inhaling, trying to quiet the tremble in her body. Then the figure moved into the room, walked directly to the bed. Stopped there. Lydia's stomach turned when she realized what he was doing. He was standing over the bed, looking at the empty space where she should have been. He stood there for a long time. Maybe a minute, maybe more. Then he turned and started walking slowly around the room. She had to clamp both hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. He walked near the window, around the dresser, and then toward the closet. She thought he was going to open it. She was sure of it. But he didn't. Instead, he stopped just in front of the doors. She could see the shadow of his legs through the slats. He stood there, and stood, and stood. Lydia's legs were starting to cramp, but she didn't dare move. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned and walked out of the room, down the hallway, down the stairs. Silence. She stayed in that closet for another 20 minutes before slowly sliding the door open. The house was dark and quiet again. She didn't have a plan. She just knew she needed to get out. She tiptoed to the bedroom door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. She crept to the stairs and paused. Still no sound. She descended each step carefully, skipping the third one because it always creaked. At the bottom, she peered around the corner. The front door was still locked. Deadbolt intact. Nothing looked out of place. But the sliding back door was open, just an inch or two. She knew she had locked it. She rushed to the kitchen to grab her phone charger and plugged it into the wall. The phone lit up but was still too dead to turn on. She grabbed her keys, threw on a hoodie, and slipped out the front door. She drove to a gas station a few blocks away and waited for the phone to charge enough to call the police. When they arrived at the house, they found the back door's latch had been jimmied open. Nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry elsewhere, no fingerprints. They took her statement seriously. A break-in with someone still inside was a big deal, especially in that neighborhood. The officers were kind, but ultimately couldn't do much. "You were lucky," one of them said. "He probably thought no one was home and got spooked." Lydia didn't sleep at all the next night. Darren came home the following day, visibly shaken when she told him everything. They talked about selling the house, but it never got beyond talk. She couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had come into the house that night wasn't just a random burglar. He hadn't gone through drawers. He hadn't taken electronics. He had walked through the house with purpose, like he knew it. 3 days after the incident, Lydia checked the mailbox and found a letter. No return address, just her name on the envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed the inside of her bedroom, her side of the bed, taken from the closet. She dropped it immediately. They reported it again. Police came out, took the photo, said they'd check prints, but warned it was likely another dead end. For the next 2 months, nothing happened. Then one night around 2 a.m., Darren got up to get a glass of water. He froze in the hallway. Lydia heard him whisper, "What the hell?" She ran out and he pointed toward the staircase. There was a note at the top step. A single sheet of white paper folded in half. On it were the words, "I know you're awake now." They moved the next week, left behind furniture, appliances, and anything they could live without. The house was sold as is. Lydia still doesn't sleep through the night. She checks every lock, every window, every camera, every single night. Their new home has a security system tied to local police, steel-reinforced doors, motion lights. Still, sometimes she wakes up and feels like someone's watching. Once, 6 months after they moved, she got a package. It contained nothing but a key, the same key they used to use on their old backsliding door. Story the end. It started as a normal evening in early November. The sun had set early, and the chill of approaching winter was beginning to seep into the bones of the city. I lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an aging complex in a mid-sized town. I'd moved in less than a year before after a rough breakup, and was still getting used to the quiet, to the stillness of being by myself. I liked it that way. The apartment was cozy, a bit cramped, but mine. I paid the rent on time, worked as an IT consultant, and kept to myself. That night, I had spent most of my evening finishing some work, then watching a few episodes of a true crime documentary on Netflix. Around 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, made a cup of chamomile tea, and settled in my small bedroom with a book. The heater hummed softly in the background, and I felt the comforting lull of solitude. Around midnight, I heard a faint noise downstairs, a soft thud, maybe a scrape. I paused, listening. The building was old, pipes creaked, the walls shifted with the cold. Probably just the building settling, I thought. Still, a creeping unease tickled the back of my neck. I put the book down and rose, deciding to check the front door's lock. It was bolted tight. I locked it again anyway, double-checking. Back in bed, I tried to push the uneasy feeling away, but it lingered. I lay awake for a while, eyes fixed on the darkened ceiling, straining to catch any other sounds. Suddenly, the sound came again, louder this time, a scraping, then a faint click. It was coming from the living room. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I grabbed my phone, thumbed to call 911, but hesitated. What if I was imagining things? What if it was nothing? The scrape happened again, this time accompanied by the faint sound of something heavy being dragged. I slipped out of bed, careful to keep quiet, and grabbed the flashlight I kept on my nightstand. Creeping toward the bedroom door, I peered into the dark hallway. The apartment was silent, save for the muffled sounds from the living room. I moved toward the living room door, the beam of the flashlight steady. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The window by the sliding glass door to the balcony was open. The latch was broken. That was impossible. I had locked it that morning. I always locked it. I would never leave it open at night. And the curtains were swaying gently from a breeze I had not noticed before. My breath caught in my throat as the flashlight beam swept across the room. The sofa cushions were tossed aside. The TV remote lay shattered on the floor. A lamp was knocked over, its shade ripped, and then at the far end of the room, I saw it. Footprints. Dark, muddy footprints that led from the balcony into the hallway and toward the bedrooms. Panic surged through me. I backed away, heart hammering, and grabbed my phone again. This time I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I think someone's inside my apartment, I whispered, voice trembling. Stay on the line, ma'am. Are you in a safe location? I looked around. My bedroom was just down the hall. I hurried there and locked the door behind me. I'm in my bedroom now, I said. Good. Stay quiet. Officers are on their way. I dropped to the floor by the door, flashlight and phone clutched tightly. Minutes later, which felt like hours, I heard voices outside the door. Police, someone called. Open up. I unlocked the door, letting 2 officers inside. They swept through the apartment quickly but found no one. The footprints stopped at my bedroom door and disappeared. Did you see anyone? One officer asked. No. But the window was broken, and there are footprints, I replied. They took pictures, collected the footprints, and assured me they would increase patrols in the area. I was told to stay with a friend for the night, which I did. The next day, I called a locksmith and had all windows and doors reinforced. I bought a security camera system with motion detectors and alarms. For the first week, everything seemed normal. Then, about 10 days later, it happened again. I was sitting at the kitchen table, working late into the night on a project, when I heard the sound of the front door unlocking. I froze. I knew I had locked it before starting work. The door creaked open just a few inches. I grabbed the pepper spray I kept under the sink and quietly moved toward the living room. Suddenly, a man stepped inside. He was tall, thin, with a hoodie pulled low over his face. His eyes darted nervously. I slammed the kitchen cabinet door, the noise loud. He turned and bolted toward the back door. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. He disappeared out the back before officers arrived, leaving the door wide open. I was shaken, but unharmed. The police said he had likely been watching me for weeks, tracking my schedule, waiting for a chance to enter. I installed extra locks and made sure to never be alone at night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. 2 weeks later, it was worse. I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing beside my bed. My heart froze. I slowly opened my eyes. There, crouched on the floor, was the same man. His face was pale, eyes wide and wild. He was reaching out, his hand inches from my face. I screamed, grabbing the baseball bat I kept by the bed. He scrambled back, running out the door and disappearing down the hall. I called 911 immediately. They arrived in minutes. This time, they brought a K-9 unit. They searched the entire building and the surrounding area, but found no trace of him. I never felt safe in that apartment again. I moved out 2 days later. The landlord claimed no other tenants reported similar issues. I found out later that the man was a drifter with a history of home invasions, never caught. The scars from that experience linger. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the soft scraping, the faint footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if he's still out there. Story the end. The night had settled heavily over the quiet suburban street where Emily lived. It was the kind of night that felt still enough to hear the slightest creak or whisper, the faint sigh of wind brushing through dry leaves, the distant bark of a restless dog, the occasional hum of a car driving past. Emily's modest single-story house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, surrounded by trimmed hedges and a white picket fence. Inside, everything seemed calm. Emily was a 29-year-old graphic designer working from home due to the pandemic. She enjoyed the solitude, especially after her recent breakup. The house was her sanctuary, a place she could control, organize, and feel safe. She kept the doors locked, windows latched, and her phone close by. But tonight, something felt off. She was sitting in her living room, finishing up a project on her laptop. The clock on the wall showed 11:43 p.m., and the street outside was silent. She rubbed her tired eyes and glanced toward the front door out of habit, noticing for a fleeting moment that the porch light was flickering, then steady again. Maybe the bulb was old. As she worked, a faint noise came from the kitchen, soft, like a barely audible shuffle. Emily froze. The kitchen was at the back of the house, separated from the living room by a small hallway. She told herself it was probably the house settling or the old pipes. But the noise persisted. now a faint scraping sound. Heart pounding slightly, Emily set her laptop aside and carefully stood up. She moved toward the hallway, trying not to make any noise. The scraping came again, unmistakable this time, something heavy being dragged along the tile floor. She felt a cold wave of fear rush over her, but forced herself to stay calm. She remembered the pepper spray in the kitchen drawer and quietly moved toward it. As she reached for the drawer, the lights flickered and then went out, plunging the kitchen into darkness. The power outage was sudden, complete, and immediate. The house felt like a dark, suffocating cage. Emily's breath came in quick, shallow gasps. She grabbed her phone from the counter and turned on the flashlight app. The beam of light wobbled in her trembling hand as she scanned the room. Then she saw it. The back door, the one leading to the fenced backyard, was slightly ajar. She could see muddy footprints on the floor leading into the kitchen from outside. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body was frozen. Somewhere behind her, the sound of something shifting in the living room broke the silence. A thud, a low, heavy breath. Emily spun around, shining her flashlight wildly. The beam landed on a tall figure standing by the sofa. He was wearing a dark hoodie, just the hood pulled over his head, shadowing his face. His hands were gloved, and his posture was tense, ready to move. Emily's eyes locked on his, wide with terror. Her voice barely escaped her throat as she whispered, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure said nothing. In one swift motion, he lunged toward her. Emily stumbled back, knocking over a small side table. The noise seemed to snap something loose inside her. Survival instinct took over. She raised the pepper spray and sprayed directly into the man's face. He howled in pain, swatting at his eyes. Emily seized the moment, darting past him and sprinting toward the front door. Her hand fumbled for the lock, then the doorknob. It was stuck, locked from outside. Her heart slammed in her chest. Behind her, the intruder recovered quickly and chased after her. Panicked, Emily ran to the hallway closet, yanked open the door, and pulled out the emergency baseball bat she had bought months ago after a break-in 2 blocks away. The man's heavy footsteps were closing in fast. She gripped the bat tight, waiting. He appeared at the closet entrance, his face finally visible in the flashlight beam. A gaunt, pale man, his eyes wild and desperate. No mask, no mercy. Emily swung the bat with all her might. The bat connected with a sickening crack against his jaw. He staggered back, clutching his face, blood beginning to trickle down his chin. The moment was hers. She bolted out the back door into the yard, running toward the fence. The gate was locked with a key on the other side. She looked back. The man was limping, but still following. Her mind raced for an escape. There was a neighbor's house 2 doors down, lights still on. She screamed as loud as she could, pounding on the neighbor's door with shaking hands. The neighbor, Mr. Thompson, opened the door in his pajamas. Emily gasped out what was happening as the man lurched closer. Mr. Thompson grabbed his phone and called 911. The intruder paused, calculating. Sirens wailed in the distance. He bolted, disappearing into the night. The police arrived minutes later and took Emily's statement. They found muddy footprints leading from the backyard into the house, signs that the intruder had been inside for at least 15 minutes. Neighbors reported hearing screams. Emily stayed with a friend for a week, her trust in safety shattered. The intruder was never caught. Months later, Emily moved to a different city. Sometimes when she lies awake, she still hears the soft scrape of footsteps and wonders if he's out there, waiting. Story the end. I remember the night like it was yesterday, even though it's been years since it happened. It was a Friday in early November, a cold and foggy evening. I lived alone in a small townhouse in a suburban neighborhood outside Philadelphia, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names but mostly kept to themselves. I worked late shifts at the hospital, and that night I was finally off, looking forward to a quiet weekend. That evening, I'd spent hours cleaning the place, trying to make it feel like home. I lived there about 6 months at the time, still getting used to the silence that comes with living alone. I had just finished making dinner and was settling in with a book on the couch. The TV was off, the only sound coming from the ticking clock on the wall and the occasional hum of the furnace. I was on the second chapter when I heard it, a faint knock at the front door. It was soft, but deliberate, like someone was trying not to make a scene. I wasn't expecting anyone. My closest neighbor was a few houses down, and usually if someone stopped by, they'd call or text first. I glanced at the clock, about 9:15 p.m. I didn't want to open the door without knowing who it was. I went to the peephole, squinting through the tiny lens. The porch light cast a pale circle on the stoop, but the fog softened everything. I could barely make out a figure standing there. A man, mid-30s maybe, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His face was partly hidden in shadow, but I could tell he wasn't smiling. I asked, "Who is it?" but he didn't answer. I locked the deadbolt tighter, stepped back, and called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher took my information and said they'd send someone to check it out. I stayed near the door, phone pressed to my ear, eyes fixed on the peephole. After what felt like an eternity but was probably about 10 minutes, a patrol car cruised down the street. The lights weren't flashing. The officer parked a few houses down and walked slowly toward my door. I opened it a crack, feeling safer now that help was nearby. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" he asked, glancing at the empty porch. "There was a man knocking a few minutes ago. I'm not sure what he wanted." "He didn't say anything," I explained. The officer nodded and said, "I don't see anyone now. I'll stay around for a while. If you hear anything suspicious, call us immediately." I thanked him and closed the door, locking it again. My heart was pounding harder than usual. I settled back on the couch, bathed in the dull glow of the table lamp, trying to focus on my book, but my mind kept drifting back to that man on my porch. I kept checking the locks every few minutes. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard it again, this time a louder knock on the back door. It was the kind of sound that shakes you out of your skin because it's so unexpected and urgent. I froze. The back door led to a small fenced backyard that I barely used, so I never expected anyone to come through there. I tiptoed to the kitchen window and peeked out. No one in sight. I pulled back the curtain and looked closer. The gate to the yard was slightly open. I locked the back door and made sure the deadbolt was engaged. I didn't call the police this time. I was too scared to even speak. I sat down on the kitchen floor, trying to breathe steadily. The house felt colder, emptier. Then the power went out, just like that. The entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and checked the circuit breaker. It was on, so the outage must have been outside. I heard something then, a soft scraping noise coming from the basement door. I don't have a basement, but the house had a small crawl space under the kitchen floor. The door to it was just a panel with a latch. I locked the latch instinctively. My phone's light scanned the kitchen, the hallway, the living room. No movement, no sounds except my own ragged breathing. Then a loud bang from the front door. It was the sound of a fist hitting wood repeatedly. I froze, heart racing, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The banging stopped. Then a faint voice whispered, "Open up." I didn't respond. The door handle rattled violently. Then silence. I tried the door. Locked tight. I moved back toward the stairs that led to my bedroom on the second floor. I was going to call 911 when suddenly the phone screen went black. No signal, no service. I was completely cut off. The footsteps started then. Heavy, slow steps on the first floor hardwood. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay out of sight. I thought about screaming, but I didn't want to give away my position. The footsteps came closer to the kitchen, then stopped. I held my breath. Then came the sound of something being dragged across the floor. My mind raced, imagining all the worst possibilities. I heard breathing, heavy, uneven, then a soft chuckle, and then silence. I waited for what felt like hours, frozen in place. Then the power came back on. My phone buzzed with 3 missed calls from the police. I immediately called back, voice shaking. They told me a neighbor had reported suspicious activity in the area. They were dispatching officers. I tried to stay calm and waited by the front window. After about 15 minutes, flashing blue lights swept through the street. The officers burst into the house without hesitation. They found the back gate open, the broken window in the kitchen, and muddy footprints leading from the yard to the front door. But there was no sign of the intruder. They told me the man was likely casing the house, waiting for a chance to break in while I was distracted. I stayed with a friend that night. The police increased patrols in the neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, I installed an alarm system, security cameras, motion sensors, and extra locks. Still, the fear never went away. I moved out 6 months later. Sometimes when the wind howls at night, I swear I hear footsteps on the porch and the faint knock of a stranger waiting to come inside. Story the end. The night started like any other quiet Thursday for Mark. He had just finished his late shift at the hospital and was eager to get home, kick off his shoes, and settle into the comfort of his small suburban house. The neighborhood was typically peaceful, the kind of place where everyone knew each other but kept to themselves. Mark liked it that way. It was his refuge from the chaos of the emergency room. He pulled into his driveway around midnight, the street lamp casting a soft glow over the manicured lawns. The air was cool but still, a faint breeze rustling the leaves. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside, flipping on the hallway light. The house smelled faintly of lavender, a candle he'd left burning earlier that evening. He tossed his keys on the counter and headed straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. As he sipped, he glanced at the clock. Midnight. The world outside was silent except for the occasional bark of a distant dog. Mark's phone buzzed, a message from his sister checking in. He smiled, replying quickly, then tossed the phone onto the sofa. He decided to watch some TV while unwinding. He settled on the couch, wrapped in a worn blanket, eyes half-lidded as the late-night talk show droned in the background. The quiet was soothing. Suddenly, there was a faint noise from the back of the house. It was soft but distinct, like the scraping of a shoe against the wooden deck. Mark froze, the noise cutting through the calm like a knife. His heartbeat quickened. Maybe it was just the wind or a raccoon, but something didn't sit right. He reached for his phone on the coffee table, thumb hovering over the flashlight app. The noise came again, louder this time. Scraping, shuffling. Not from outside, but inside. From the kitchen. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't alone. Mark stood up slowly, every muscle tense. He moved toward the kitchen, trying to keep calm. The lights flickered slightly, or maybe his mind was playing tricks. He peered into the kitchen. Nothing. The back door was closed. He exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. From behind the sliding glass door leading to the backyard, a shadow moved. Panic slammed through him like a wave. He stumbled backward, bumping into the couch. The sliding door was locked, but whoever it was had been trying to get in. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears. He grabbed the kitchen knife from the counter and crept toward the door. Suddenly, the glass shattered with a deafening crash. A man, face covered with a ski mask, burst through the broken door, clutching a crowbar. The intruder was tall and broad, movements fast and aggressive. "Stay down," the man barked, waving the crowbar threateningly. Mark dropped the knife, hands raised, heart pounding so loudly he was sure the intruder could hear it. "Listen, I don't want trouble," Mark said, voice shaking. "Just take what you want and go." The intruder laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "That's not how this works." Mark's mind raced. He was alone when to call for help, and the man was clearly dangerous. He scanned the room desperately, looking for anything to defend himself. The intruder advanced, stepping over shards of broken glass. Mark backed toward the hallway, every step careful but frantic. Suddenly, a second figure appeared behind the intruder, a woman, also masked, holding a small handgun. "Check the rooms," she said curtly. Mark's throat tightened. The woman's voice was calm but cold. There was no mercy there. They started moving through the house, shouting for Mark to stay put. The woman kept the gun trained on him while the man rifled through drawers, cupboards, tearing through everything in sight. Mark's mind spun, trying to understand what they wanted. Money? Valuables? His wallet was in his pocket, but he didn't dare move. They made their way into the living room, the man yanking the television off its stand, smashing the screen on the floor. Mark thought of running, but the woman's gun was trained on him like a hawk. The intruder dropped the TV and gestured for Mark to follow them. "Come on, move." Mark's legs trembled, but he obeyed, walking behind them through the narrow hallway. The woman held the gun low but ready. They dragged him into the master bedroom and pushed him down onto the bed. "Get on your knees," the woman ordered. Mark did as he was told, eyes darting around for any chance to escape. They began searching the bedroom, overturning nightstands and ripping open closets. The man found a safe hidden in the closet. He tried to pry it open with the crowbar, but it wouldn't budge. "Got the combination?" the woman asked. Mark shook his head frantically. "No, I don't know." They exchanged glances. The man cursed and slammed the crowbar into the floor. The woman approached Mark again, gun pointed directly at his chest. "Look," Mark said quickly, desperate. "I'll tell you everything I have. I don't keep much. There's some cash in my wallet and some jewelry in the bedroom drawer." The woman motioned to the man to back off. The man grunted and stepped away from the safe. Mark's hands were shaking as he pulled out his wallet and placed it on the dresser. The woman rifled through it, pulling out a few bills and some cards. The man grabbed a small jewelry box from the drawer and flipped it open. Inside was a simple gold chain and a watch, gifts from his late grandmother. The intruders looked satisfied. Suddenly, Mark heard a faint noise from the hallway, a creak, like someone opening the front door. The woman's head snapped toward the sound. "Who the hell is that?" she hissed. Mark's blood ran cold. Footsteps approached from the front door. Someone was coming home. The man grabbed Mark's arm roughly, pulling him up. "Stay quiet," the woman whispered fiercely. Mark's heart pounded as the footsteps grew louder, closer. The front door slammed open. "Hey, Mark, you home?" a voice called out. Mark recognized it immediately. It was his neighbor, Lisa, coming back late from a friend's house. The intruders exchanged panicked looks. The man growled and shoved Mark toward the closet. "Hide." Mark stumbled into the dark closet as the woman moved to the front door, gun raised. Lisa entered the house cautiously, sensing something was off. She called out again, but no answer. She took a step inside, then another. The woman aimed the gun at Lisa's head through the cracked door. "Stay back," she shouted. Lisa froze, hands raised. "What's going on, Mark? Are you okay?" Mark's breath caught in the closet. He wanted to scream for help, but dared not move. The woman stepped into the hallway, moving slowly toward Lisa, who was now backing toward the door. Lisa's phone was in her hand. She dialed 911 quietly. The intruder's eyes darted to the phone, then back to Lisa. "Drop it," the woman commanded. Lisa complied, lowering the phone. "Where's Mark?" she asked. "In the bedroom," the woman replied, voice icy. Lisa swallowed hard, looking between the two masked figures. Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance. The intruder's heads snapped toward the sound. The woman cursed under her breath. The man grabbed Mark from the closet roughly and pushed him ahead. "We gotta move," the woman hissed. They shoved Mark toward the back door, forcing him outside through the broken glass. The cold night air hit Mark's face as they dragged him into the backyard, toward the tree line that bordered the property. Lisa was shouting for help now, yelling to neighbors as she backed away. Mark's mind was racing, trying to find a way out. The man shoved Mark to the ground, gun pressed against his temple. "Last chance," the woman said. "Give us the safe combination or you're dead." Mark looked up at the dark faces behind the masks, the cold gun, the desperate danger. "I don't know," he whispered. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights spilled across the backyard. Police officers burst from the tree line, shouting commands. The intruders panicked, pulling Mark to his feet and pushing him forward. Gunshots rang out. Mark dropped to the ground, heart hammering. The man and woman ran toward the woods, disappearing into the night. Officers secured the scene, treating Mark and questioning Lisa. Mark sat on the grass, shivering, overwhelmed but alive. In the days that followed, Mark replayed the night over and over in his mind. The broken glass, the cold gun, the fear that had gripped him, how close it had come to ending differently. His neighborhood rallied around him, neighbors checking in, police increasing patrols. The safe remained unopened, a grim reminder that some things are better left untouched. Mark's life had been changed forever that night, not just by the fear, but by the fragile sense of safety shattered in a single moment. He knew he'd never take the quiet nights for granted again. Story the end. The evening started like any other for me in early November 2016. I had just moved into a small two-bedroom bungalow on the edge of a suburban neighborhood in Raleigh, North Carolina. The house was nothing fancy, built in the 1950s, with the creaky floors and drafty windows that come with old homes. But after years of renting cramped apartments and crashing on friends' couches, it was mine. I was proud to finally have a place where I could lock the door and feel safe. I was 29, working a regular 9-to-5 job in IT, and honestly, I wasn't used to the quiet that came with living alone in a residential area. The neighborhood was peaceful, too peaceful sometimes. On that particular night, I was home alone. My girlfriend was visiting her family about an hour away, and I had no plans beyond ordering takeout and watching some late-night TV. I locked every door and window before sitting down to eat, as always. The soft hum of the heater filled the silence. Outside, the occasional sound of leaves rustling in the wind was all I could hear. I was about halfway through my dinner when the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered, but there was only static, no voice. I hung up, assuming it was a prank or a telemarketer with a bad connection. I tried to shrug it off. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same unknown number. This time, I answered cautiously. A low, raspy breathing came through the line, but no words. I told whoever it was that they had the wrong number and hung up. The calls stopped after that. I didn't think much more about it until I went to bed around 11 p.m. I had just crawled under the covers when I heard a faint noise outside my bedroom window. It sounded like something brushing against the siding. I froze and strained to listen. The sound stopped. Maybe it was just the wind or a stray animal. But then, through the silence, I heard it again. A faint scrape, like someone dragging something heavy along the side of the house. My heart started racing. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. I crept out of bed, careful not to make a sound. The hallway light was off, but the living room lamp cast a faint glow through the front window. I pulled the curtains aside and peered out. Nothing. Just the empty driveway and a darkened street beyond. I told myself it was probably nothing and went back to bed, locking the bedroom door behind me. But sleep didn't come easy. My mind was racing, imagining every worst-case scenario. At around 1:15 a.m., I heard the sound of the front door handle turning, then a soft click. Someone was trying to get in. I sat up, frozen with fear. The deadbolt was locked, but whoever was outside was testing it. My first thought was to call 911, but my phone was on the other side of the room. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed and quietly made my way to the bedroom door. I held my breath as I listened. The door handle turned again, harder this time. Then footsteps on the front porch. They were pacing back and forth. I wanted to scream, but forced myself to stay silent. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard a window slide open somewhere in the house. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I crept to the bedroom door and looked down the hall. The light from the living room TV flickered faintly. I heard the creak of floorboards. Someone was moving through my house. My mind went blank. I ducked back into the bedroom, locked the door, and slid the bolt shut. Then I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher about the intruder. I told them I was hiding in my bedroom. The dispatcher told me officers were en route. I stayed quiet, listening to every sound. Footsteps past my door. Slow, deliberate. The doorknob rattled. I gripped the bat tighter. Suddenly, the door handle stopped moving. Silence. Then I heard a low voice, male, muffled, speaking softly to someone else. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard two voices now. They moved away, down the hall toward the kitchen. I could hear cabinets opening and closing, drawers sliding, then a crash, glass breaking. My heart sank. I thought about making a run for it, but I knew I'd never make it to the front door without being caught. I stayed hidden. Minutes passed like hours. Then distant sirens. The intruders froze, footsteps running, then silence. The police arrived and swept the house. They found the back door unlocked, a broken kitchen window, and evidence that two men had been inside. They told me the men were likely looking for valuables, but had left after hearing the sirens. I was shaken, but unharmed. The police advised me to stay elsewhere for a few nights. I stayed with a friend. In the following weeks, I installed a full security system with cameras and motion detectors. The neighborhood felt different after that. I realized how vulnerable I had been. I never heard from the men again, and no memory of that night. But the memory of that night lingers. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the creak of a floorboard, and I wonder if they ever really left. Story the end. The night settled in thick and cold, like a blanket suffocating the small, sleepy neighborhood where Emily lived. She had always thought her house was a sanctuary, a place where she could let her guard down after long days working as a graphic designer. The cozy two-story home had been hers for just over a year, nestled in a quiet suburb lined with tall oaks and well-kept lawns. But that night, all the comfort she'd built around herself would unravel in a way she never imagined. Emily pulled into her driveway just before 10 p.m., exhausted and craving nothing more than a warm shower and her soft bed. The street was eerily silent. The usual distant sounds of children playing or neighbors chatting were absent. Her car's tires crunched on the gravel as she reached the front door, fumbling in her purse for her keys. The porch light, which she always left on, was dark. A chill ran down her spine, but she brushed it off as a bulb burned out. Unlocking the door, she stepped inside and called out, "Hello? Whiskers?" Her cat usually greeted her, rubbing against her legs, but there was no movement. The house felt unnaturally cold, and an unsettling quiet filled the rooms. She shook off the feeling, telling herself she was just tired. In the kitchen, she placed her purse on the counter and reached for the light switch. The lights flickered briefly before cutting out completely, plunging her into darkness. Emily's breath hitched, heart pounding slightly faster. She grabbed her phone to illuminate the room, noticing immediately that the batteries were low. She moved cautiously to the breaker box in the laundry room, hoping a simple reset would restore power. But as she opened the door, the pungent smell of something metallic and stale hit her nostrils. A smell she couldn't place but immediately set her nerves on edge. The door was slightly ajar, though she was certain she had closed it earlier. As she reached to flip the breaker, she heard a faint noise from the living room, the soft creak of floorboards, almost like a whisper. Her body froze. She called out, "Is someone there?" But only silence replied. Whiskers was nowhere to be seen. Instinct urged her to leave, but she knew if someone was inside, running would only make her vulnerable. She locked the laundry room door behind her and crept toward the living room, gripping a heavy kitchen knife she found on the counter. The living room was cold and dark except for the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. As she scanned the room with her phone's flashlight, a shadow moved near the window. Her heart thudded wildly. Then, suddenly, the sliding door she always kept locked was slightly open. She was sure she had bolted it before leaving for work that morning. Panic and terror surged through her. The silhouette of a man appeared, stepping inside with deliberate, slow movements. He wore a dark hoodie, gloves, and a mask covering the lower half of his face. In his hands was a crowbar. Emily's instincts screamed at her to escape, but she was frozen, breath shallow, eyes wide. She backed toward the kitchen, clutching the knife tighter. The intruder's eyes caught the glint of the blade, and he paused. "Don't make a sound," he hissed, voice low and chilling. Emily's mind raced. She had no phone service. The power outage had knocked out cell towers nearby. No neighbors were around. The street was deserted. She needed to think fast. The man advanced, crowbar raised. She swung the knife blindly, hitting his arm. He cursed and lunged, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. Emily struggled, twisting free and running toward the back door. But as she reached for the handle, it slammed shut behind her with a force that knocked the breath out of her. The man was blocking her escape. Trapped, Emily screamed, hoping the neighbors might hear. She heard a muffled sound, her neighbor's dog barking down the street, but no immediate rescue. Desperation took over. Emily scrambled to the stove, grabbing a heavy cast iron pan. When the intruder came at her again, she swung it with all her might, the pan connecting with his temple with a sickening thud. He stumbled, releasing her. She ran to the door again and tried the knob. It was locked from the outside. She looked around for a window or any exit. Suddenly, the man recovered, blood trickling down his face, eyes wild with fury. He grabbed a nearby kitchen chair and swung it toward her. Emily dodged, ducking behind the counter. Her breathing was ragged. Every instinct told her to fight or flee, but the man was relentless, smashing through the kitchen with the chair, each blow coming closer. She spotted the back window above the sink, the kind that opened outward. She rushed to it and yanked it open, gasping as the cold night air hit her face. "Help!" she shouted, voice hoarse. The man lunged at her just as she climbed onto the windowsill, his hands grabbing at her jacket. She kicked wildly, breaking free and dropping to the ground outside. Emily scrambled into the bushes, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding her veins. She ran across the yard toward the street, hearing the intruder curse and pursue. Then, distant but growing louder, she heard sirens. Her neighbor had apparently noticed the struggle or the barking dog and called the police. The intruder cursed again and disappeared back into the house, just as flashing red and blue lights bathed the street. Emily collapsed into the arms of a responding officer, shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. The police cleared the house, finding the man hiding in the basement, bloodied but alive. He was a known burglar with a record of break-ins, targeting homes like hers late at night when residents were vulnerable. Afterward, Emily struggled with the aftermath. The nightmares, the shattered sense of security, the fear that returned whenever a light flickered or a noise echoed through the house. She installed a new security system, got a dog, and changed the locks, but some things never healed. Even now, months later, the cold, silent night sometimes feels alive with shadows, and the memory of those hours trapped in her own home lingers like a whisper she cannot escape. Story: the end. It started around 1:30 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock on my phone when I heard the noise. It was subtle at first, what sounded like a faint shuffle outside the living room window. I live in a quiet neighborhood in the suburbs, not the kind of place where you expect to be on edge at night. My house is a modest, single story, tucked away in a cul-de-sac with motion sensor lights on both sides and a tall wooden fence enclosing the backyard. It's not a fortress, but I thought it was safe enough. I was alone. My wife, Jenna, had taken our daughter to her parents' place for the weekend. Her mom just come out of surgery and they needed some extra help around the house. I stayed behind for work, graveyard shift security at a local logistics warehouse. But I'd taken a couple days off to fix a plumbing issue in the bathroom and catch up on rest. The silence of the house that night felt deeper than usual. I paused whatever movie I was watching, some forgettable action flick, and muted the TV. I sat perfectly still, listening. Nothing. I waited another 30 seconds. Maybe it was the wind or some animal. I pressed play again, thinking I was just being paranoid. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Closer this time. A faint scuff, like someone's shoe grazing the concrete path beside the house. My gut tightened. I stood up slowly and turned off the TV. The room fell into complete silence. I walked over to the front door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. I waited, watching, breathing shallowly. Still nothing. The motion sensor light outside didn't turn on. I was about to turn away when I heard a soft click behind me, like a doorknob being tested. I spun around. It came from the back door, the sliding glass one that led to the patio. I crept through the kitchen toward it, my heart pounding now. The lights were off, and I didn't want to turn them on in case someone was really out there. I crouched near the counter, just out of view of the glass, and listened. Silence. Then, unmistakably, the sound of someone slowly trying the door handle again. Gently. Deliberately. I reached for the knife block on the counter and grabbed the biggest one I could find. I dialed 911, keeping the phone low, trying not to make a sound. It rang once, twice. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered. Someone's trying to get into my house. The operator asked for my address. I gave it as quietly and clearly as I could. She told me officers were on their way and to stay on the line. I edged up just enough to peek through the curtain that hung beside the glass door. I couldn't see anyone directly, but the faint edge of a shadow moved across the wooden deck. I think they're in the backyard, I whispered. The operator asked if I could see any weapons. I couldn't, not from where I was. She told me to lock myself in a room if I could and stay quiet. I told her the doors were all locked already, but I didn't want to move. I didn't want to give away my location. That's when I heard the side gate creak open. My backyard is fully enclosed. There's no way to get in without either jumping the fence or opening that gate. I never heard it open, which means it had already been opened before. I felt sick. Someone had been back there for a while. Then came the metallic clack of the sliding door's lock being tampered with. It wasn't subtle anymore. They weren't testing it. They were trying to force it open. I told the operator. She said officers were minutes away. I could hear her typing in the background, alerting dispatch. I don't know why, but I suddenly thought of the old broom handle I used to block the track of the sliding door. I hadn't put it in that night. I cursed myself for it. I could see the door jiggling now, visibly shifting in the frame. And then it stopped. Everything went silent again. I held my breath, waiting. A full minute passed. 2. Then the glass shattered. I jumped back, instinctively crouching low. Shards of glass exploded across the tile floor. A heavy boot landed inside. then another. They were in. I whispered to the operator, "They're inside." She told me to hide if I could and stay on the line. I crept backward, crawling on my hands and knees down the hallway toward the bedroom. I heard the intruder move through the kitchen, stepping over glass. He didn't speak. He didn't make any unnecessary noise. He knew what he was doing. I made it to the bedroom and quietly shut the door behind me. I clicked the lock and shoved a chair under the doorknob. I crawled into the closet and slid the door shut behind me. The operator kept talking to me, asking for updates, her voice barely audible from the speaker. I heard the footsteps getting closer. Hallway. Carpet now. Muffled. Deliberate. I remembered the creak in the hallway floorboard near the bathroom. I had always meant to fix it. It creaked. He was right outside the bedroom. My heart was pounding so loud I was afraid it would give me away. I gripped the knife tighter, praying he wouldn't come in. Then he did. The doorknob rattled, then thudded against the lock. The chair held for a moment. Then he kicked it. The door cracked inward, the chair sliding slightly. Another kick. Harder. The lock gave way. The door burst open, slamming against the wall. I held my breath. He was in the room. The footsteps moved slowly. I heard the rustle of drawers being opened. A closet door sliding, not mine. Then he stopped. The room fell into a terrifying silence. I could hear only my own heartbeat, the soft static of the operator on the phone. Then a second set of footsteps entered the room. I almost dropped the phone. 2 of them. They spoke in low whispers. Quick, to the point. Check the closet. The door handle to my closet moved. I didn't think. I burst out of the closet screaming, knife in hand. I slashed wildly. One of them jumped back, shouting. The other stumbled. I caught him in the arm. He screamed and fell backward. I turned and bolted through the open door, down the hallway. I could hear them scrambling behind me. I burst through the front door, barefoot, and ran into the street. Just as 2 squad cars pulled into the cul-de-sac. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn. I dropped the knife immediately, hands raised, shouting, "They're inside!" They moved fast, guns up, barking commands as they entered the house. I collapsed onto the curb, trembling, struggling to breathe. One of the officers stayed with me, asking questions, trying to keep me conscious and alert. I could barely speak. They caught one of the men inside, tackled him trying to flee through the hallway. The other escaped through the broken glass in the back and disappeared into the neighborhood. They never found him. The man they arrested had a long record, breaking and entering, assault, even a past murder conviction that had somehow ended in a plea deal. They suspected the other guy might have been his brother, or someone with a similar rap sheet. I found out later they'd been targeting homes in our area for weeks, staking them out. They must have seen my wife and daughter leave, noticed the lights off in the back, maybe assumed the house was empty. The plan was probably to rob the place, but they came prepared, too prepared. One officer quietly told me they'd found duct tape, zip ties, and a knife in the guy's backpack. He wasn't there just to steal a TV. And I don't think I would have walked out alive if I hadn't reacted when I did. I didn't sleep for days after. Every sound made me jump. I installed cameras, floodlights, a new alarm system, but none of it made me feel safer. Because what scared me the most wasn't what happened, it was how quiet it all was, how close they got, how long they may have been watching, and the fact that one of them is still out there. Story, the end. It was early March when I moved back into my childhood home to care for my father. He was recovering from a stroke, and while he could still speak and walk short distances, he needed help with basic tasks, meals, medication, bathing. The house was in a quiet suburb, tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with identical split-level homes, most of them occupied by retirees or quiet families. It was the sort of neighborhood where people still left their doors unlocked during the day. At first, it was almost comforting returning to that place. I remembered riding my bike down that same street, waving to neighbors, running through sprinklers in the front yard. But something about the house felt different now, colder. Maybe it was just that I was an adult now, too aware of the creeping mold in the corners, the faint sour smell of damp wood, or the way every creak of the floorboards sounded sharper in the silence. I moved into my old bedroom upstairs. The furniture had been removed long ago, so I brought in a mattress and a few essentials. I spent my days helping my father and my nights watching TV or reading in bed, trying not to think about how isolated the place felt. It started with the noises. The first night I noticed it, I was half asleep, reading under the soft glow of a desk lamp. It was just past midnight when I heard what sounded like a light tap at the back door downstairs. Not a knock, more like fingers brushing against the glass. I paused, listening. It didn't come again. I told myself it was probably a branch, maybe a raccoon or the wind. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same sound. This time it was followed by the faintest scrape, like nails dragging slowly across glass. I got up and went to the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkness. I could barely make out the outline of the kitchen door, and nothing moved. I didn't go downstairs. I just stood there, gripping the railing, heart thudding in my chest. The third night, I turned on the floodlight in the backyard and waited by the upstairs window that overlooked the back patio. Around 12:13 a.m., I saw it. A shape, standing just outside the reach of the light, half hidden in the shadow of the tree. It was a man. I couldn't see his face. He wore a hood, maybe even a mask. But he stood very still, facing the house, facing me. I froze, not knowing what to do. He didn't move for nearly a minute. Then, just as I started to reach for my phone, he backed slowly into the darkness until he vanished completely. I called the police, of course. They came, searched the yard, took a report. But there were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. The officer, an older guy with tired eyes, tried to reassure me. Probably just some local punk trying to scare people, he said. You'd be surprised how often it happens. I wasn't reassured. The next day, I installed security cameras. I bought them online and set them up myself, one pointed at the back patio, one covering the front yard, and a third in the hallway inside the house, just outside my father's room. I didn't tell him what had happened. He was already anxious and confused enough most days. I didn't want to make things worse. That night, I stayed up watching the live feed on my laptop. Midnight passed. Nothing. 12:30. Still nothing. At 1:07 a.m., I finally allowed myself to believe it was over. I left the feed running and drifted off. A noise woke me up around 3:10 a.m. Not the gentle tapping this time. This was louder. A thump, then another, then silence. I reached for the laptop, heart pounding, and clicked through the feeds. The outside cameras were dark, just swaying branches and the dim yellow glow of the streetlights. But when I switched to the indoor camera, my blood turned to ice. There was someone inside the house. He was standing in the hallway, facing the camera, completely still. Tall, dressed in black with something white covering his face. Maybe a mask, maybe just fabric. His hands hung at his sides, gloved. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there as if waiting. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispered my address, told them someone was in the house. The operator stayed on the line with me while I locked my bedroom door and pushed the dresser in front of it. I could hear footsteps then. Slow, deliberate. Moving down the hall, then silence again. The police arrived within 5 minutes. They swept the house, no one was there. Every door was still locked. There were no signs of forced entry, like no broken windows, no disturbed furniture, nothing. But the camera footage proved it. He had been there. The officer asked to see the footage. I brought it up again on the laptop, but the hallway camera feed was gone. Only a black screen where the recording should have been. I checked the others, front yard, back patio, still working, still recording. But the indoor feed was corrupted or deleted. The officer gave me a strange look. Are you sure you didn't imagine it? I almost screamed at him. Instead, I played it cool, nodded, let them finish their sweep. After they left, I didn't sleep. For 3 nights, nothing happened. No noises, no visits. The cameras remained untouched. Then, just as I started to breathe easier, it escalated. I woke up one morning to find the front door wide open. Not just unlocked, open. The wind had blown leaves and dust into the entryway. My father was still asleep. He hadn't moved from his bed. I checked the locks. They weren't broken. The keys were still on the hook. No windows were smashed. But that door had been opened from the inside. I changed the locks that afternoon. New deadbolt, new chain. I checked every window, every crawl space. I started carrying a hammer around the house with me, just in case. 2 nights later, he came back. I woke to the sound of my father screaming. I ran to his room. He was sitting up in bed, drenched in sweat, eyes wide with terror. He was here, he said. He was in my room, standing right there. I turned on the lights. Nothing. I checked the hallway camera, still black. The other cameras, working fine. I sat with him until he calmed down. Got him back to sleep, but I didn't go back to my room. I sat in the hallway with the hammer in my lap, watching. Around 2:43 a.m., I saw something move. A shape at the end of the hall. Just a flicker, like someone ducking around the corner. I stood up, held my breath, and stepped forward. The hallway was empty. The doors were all closed. But the air was heavy, oppressive, like being watched. I didn't sleep. That morning, I went through the camera system again. I noticed something I hadn't before, a small line of code, a script that had been injected into the system. Whoever had been inside, they'd known how to delete or block that specific feed. They knew how the cameras worked. They knew my setup. That meant they'd been in my room. They'd used my computer. That same night, I moved a small nightstand in front of my bedroom door and slept with the hammer under my pillow. I set my phone to alert me if any movement was detected on any camera. At 3:11 a.m., it buzzed. Motion detected. Front yard. I opened the app. The man was standing at the end of the driveway. He didn't approach. He just stood there, staring at the house, still wearing black, still with the white mask. I watched him for 11 minutes. Then he turned and walked away. Not toward the street, not toward any of the other houses, into the woods behind the house. I called the police again. They searched the woods. Nothing. No prints, no evidence. It was like he'd vanished. The final night happened 3 days later. I woke to find the power out. No lights, no camera feed. My phone was dead. I grabbed the hammer, lit a candle, and stepped out into the hall. The air was so still I could hear my heartbeat. Then I heard it, breathing, coming from downstairs, slow, measured, like someone standing just below the stairs, waiting. I crept to the top of the stairs and looked down. There he was in the center of the living room, staring up at me. His mask was different this time, dirtier, smeared with something dark. In one hand he held something long, metal. A crowbar, maybe. I froze. Couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Then he started walking toward the stairs, step by step. I backed away, heart pounding, legs shaking. I got to my father's room, slammed the door, locked it, pushed the dresser in front again. I shook him awake. He was groggy, confused, but I held him, whispering that it would be okay. We waited. Minutes passed, then a sound, a loud crash. He was trying to break the front door. Another crash. I didn't know what to do. The phones were dead. No power, no lights. Then I remembered my old cell in the kitchen drawer. Maybe it still had a charge. I told my father to stay put, grabbed the hammer, and ran for it. I made it to the kitchen, opened the drawer. The phone was there, and so was a note. A single scrap of paper, 4 words, written in black marker, "You locked me out." Then the glass shattered. He came in through the sliding door. I ran, ducked through the dining room, sprinted back upstairs. He chased me. I could hear his boots on the stairs, the scrape of metal against the wall. I got into my room, slammed the door, locked it. I could hear him outside, breathing, whispering, then silence. An hour passed, then another. I sat against the wall, hammer in hand, listening. The sun began to rise. When I finally dared to open the door, he was gone. But in the hallway, written in black marker on the wall, were the same 4 words, "You locked me out." I moved out that same day, took my father to stay with my cousin across town, hired a company to wipe the camera system, changed every lock again. The police never caught anyone. They barely believed me. But I know what I saw. I know what he did. And sometimes in the middle of the night, I still check the cameras, just in case. Because if he got in once, he can get in again. Story the end. It was the first week of December, a quiet Thursday evening, the kind where the cold seemed to mute everything outside. My wife, Rachel, and I had just moved into a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania, a place we picked for its low crime rates and family-oriented neighborhoods. We'd only been there 2 weeks. Boxes still lined the hallway. The dining room chairs hadn't even arrived yet. Rachel was grading papers at the kitchen table, her back to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. I was sprawled out on the couch, half watching a basketball game and half scrolling through my phone. We had just gotten used to the eerie quietness that comes with detached homes. No footsteps above, no muffled arguments from next door, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional gust of wind tapping branches against the windows. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I noticed something strange. The motion sensor porch light flicked on in the backyard. I looked up, expecting to see a deer maybe. Nothing. I got up, walked over, and peeked out through the blinds. The porch was empty. The yard was pitch black beyond the ring of light. Probably a squirrel, Rachel mumbled without looking up. She had noticed the light too, but wasn't alarmed. I wasn't either. Not really. I walked back to the couch, sat down, and went back to my phone. But 20 minutes later, the light flicked on again. This time I stood up quicker. Still, nothing. I opened the door slightly, letting the cold air in, and leaned out to get a better look. Again, no movement, no sound, nothing at all. It was unsettling in a way that I couldn't quite explain. Maybe it's busted, I said to Rachel. Could be. You could turn it off for now, she replied without looking up. I stepped outside to inspect the motion light, rubbing my arms against the cold. That's when I noticed it, muddy footprints on the deck. They weren't mine. I'd only walked outside earlier that morning, and the deck was dry then. These were fresh. I crouched down and examined them. Too big to be Rachel's, and certainly not shaped like an animal's. I turned around quickly, scanned the yard again. Still nothing. I stood there for a second longer, then went back inside and locked the door. I didn't mention the footprints to Rachel. I didn't want to freak her out, and maybe I was just being paranoid. Around 10:15 p.m., Rachel decided to head to bed. I said I'd be up in a bit. I was still a little on edge, so I made sure all the doors were locked. The front, the sliding door, the garage entrance. Everything was secure. I even double-checked the windows. Just after 11 p.m., I finally turned off the TV. I turned off the lights and started upstairs. That's when I heard it. A soft creak, like a footstep, coming from the kitchen. I froze. It was so faint I thought maybe I imagined it. I waited a few seconds. Silence. I took another step up the stairs. The creak came again. I turned around slowly, peering into the dark kitchen. I couldn't see anything from where I stood. I whispered, "Hello," knowing how stupid that sounded, but I couldn't help it. No answer. I stepped back down, grabbed the flashlight from the drawer in the hallway, and quietly made my way toward the kitchen. I shone the light around the room. Empty. Everything looked normal. I started checking the doors again. Front door, locked. Garage, locked. Sliding door, locked. I exhaled a little and turned around to head back upstairs. That's when I saw the basement door was ajar. We never leave that door open. A wave of nausea hit me. My hands started sweating, despite the cold. I moved slowly toward the door and pushed it open further. The basement light was off, but the faintest creaking sound was coming from down there, like something was shifting. I turned on the basement light from the top of the stairs. The single bulb cast shadows down the steps and into the unfinished basement. I took one slow step downward, then another. Something metal clanged. I froze. "Who's down there?" I said, this time louder. No response. I backed up and shut the door. I locked it. I ran upstairs and woke Rachel. She could see the panic in my face before I said a word. "There's someone in the basement," I whispered. She sat up straight. "What?" "I'm calling the police." I made the call while Rachel locked our bedroom door and grabbed her phone. The dispatcher kept me on the line. They said officers were on their way. I felt a bit of relief, knowing someone was coming, but I didn't relax. I stood near the bedroom window, peeking out every few seconds to spot any headlights. Then we heard it. The basement door opening. We both went quiet. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on the wooden floor filled the hallway below. They were heavy, purposeful. Someone was walking through our house. We didn't speak. We barely breathed. Then the sound of something being dragged. It was dull and rhythmic, like a bag or a body across the floor. Rachel's eyes welled with tears. I motioned for her to stay silent and moved toward the door, listening. I could hear drawers being opened, something falling, a picture frame shattering. Then silence. We waited in that frozen state for what felt like forever. Finally, we saw flashing lights through the window. I opened the bedroom door carefully and called out, "The police are here!" No response. I ran downstairs as the officers knocked loudly. I let them in and told them everything. They moved quickly through the house, guns drawn, searching every room. When they got to the basement, they found the lock on the inside had been broken. They came back up and told us no one was in the house. We didn't understand. They explained the back basement window had been pried open. Whoever it was likely slipped out when they heard the police approaching. They hadn't taken anything, not even my wallet or Rachel's purse, which had been sitting right on the counter. It wasn't a burglary. It felt personal. The police didn't sugarcoat anything. He was probably watching you for days, one of them said, waiting for the right moment. Lucky you caught the signs early. They stayed until nearly 2 a.m., dusting for prints, documenting the scene. Rachel and I didn't sleep that night. We didn't sleep the next night either. 2 days later, we installed a full security system inside and out. Cameras, motion sensors, alarms. We were jumpy, paranoid, always expecting to hear footsteps or see something on the cameras. A week passed. Nothing. Then, one morning, I checked the footage from the night before, just a routine check. At 3:17 a.m., the camera facing the backyard captured something that made my blood run cold. A man, standing at the edge of the yard, watching the house. He was there for nearly 30 minutes, not moving, not attempting to come closer, just standing, watching. We called the police again. They came and took the footage, but said, without a clear shot of his face, there wasn't much they could do. They advised us to be vigilant, keep the system armed, and call them at the first sign of anything suspicious. After that, the sighting stopped. For a while. Then, a month later, Rachel went to visit her sister for a weekend. I stayed behind because of work. That Saturday night, I fell asleep on the couch again, lights still on. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the front door rattling. It wasn't the wind. I turned on the exterior camera feed on my phone. He was back. This time he was standing on the porch, directly in front of the camera, staring into the lens. His face was obscured by a hood, but I could see his eyes, wide, staring, unblinking. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched him stand there for nearly a full minute, then walk away, slowly, disappearing off the side of the porch. I called the police. Again, they came, they looked, and again, nothing. After that, we couldn't stay. We sold the house 2 months later, barely breaking even. We didn't care. We never found out who he was or what he wanted. We never saw his face. We never heard from him again. But we still wake up some nights, panicked, thinking we hear footsteps downstairs, thinking we hear the creak of a door we know we locked. We've moved 3 times since then. Every time we install new security. Every time we double-check everything, but that kind of fear doesn't go away. It stays with you, always. Story the end.